Michael, thank you for your time today. Let's dive right into it.
Yeah.
You've just returned from Taipei, where you met President Lai, a trip you made after China's ambassador publicly warned Canadian MPs to stay away. Why was it important to you to go anyway and to go now?
Well, it was important to go for two reasons. As you know, Taiwan is a democracy on the front lines of authoritarian threats from an authoritarian state. And I think it's important for democracies like Canada to show solidarity with those democracies. We show our solidarity with Ukraine. Taiwan is in some ways no different. It's another democracy facing threats from a different authoritarian state. And so I think it's important to show solidarity. The second reason that it was important to go is because of the PRC ambassador's recent comments that Canadian MPs no longer travel to Taiwan, despite long-standing practice of the last 5 decades where MPs from all parties have traveled to Taiwan to foster bilateral relations. The ambassador also made another outrageous comment. He indicated that he warned against Royal Canadian Navy warships from transiting through international straits, such as the Taiwan Strait, and said that Canadian warships should no longer transit through the Taiwan Strait, even though it's an international strait, and even though they've done so a dozen times in the last several years.
So you bought the tickets right after he made that comments?
Yeah, I think it's important. I made the decision that action speaks louder than words, and that sovereignty is not just something that you proclaim, it's something you have to exercise. This is why our Navy warships transit through international waters to maintain global commerce and open shipping lanes. It's why MPs, travel abroad for bilateral visits. So I decided to not just assert our sovereignty by issuing a statement, but also to exercise it by visiting Taiwan.
You're probably going to regret that.
I agree, and I think one of the things that came out of the trip was that it prompted the Government of Canada to issue a statement in support of Canadian MPs traveling to Taiwan. And it's also prompted MPs like Judy Scrow to make it clear that they are also planning to go to Taiwan in the near future. So I think those were the things that came out of the trip that I was happy to see.
In 2021, you were sanctioned by Beijing, and you later learned that the Chinese government had targeted your relatives in Hong Kong because of your work in Parliament. What was it like to discover that, and what did it teach you about how the Chinese state views people of Chinese descent, and also any Canadians who's critical of China?
As you pointed out, Beijing sanctioned me for not anything that I did. Ostensibly their reason for sanctioning me was because of some actions the Government of Canada took earlier in March of 2021. And so they sanctioned me for decisions that the Government of Canada made. Subsequent to that, as you pointed out, one of their diplomats here was clandestinely collecting information on me and my family to submit not to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China, but to their secret police, to the Ministry of State Security. And that was for potential future targeting of family that I have in China. So my feeling is that this has exposed what is a broad practice of Beijing in democracies, where they use transnational repression, coercive tactics, clandestine tactics to try to intimidate citizens of those democracies into silence. I've got the fortunate position of being an elected member of Parliament where I can raise these issues, but there are so many members of the community that suffer in silence because they don't have a voice. Their cases are not publicly known, and yet they're subject to this transnational repression. So I feel a responsibility, a duty, to make this kind of repression public, to be a voice for the voiceless.
You've described Taiwan as a democracy at the front lines of threats from authoritarian state. You just said that, you said it before. What did you see on the ground in Taiwan that during the trip that you wish more Canadians could see for themselves?
What I saw was a prosperous society that protects civil liberties and rights, that also respects the rule of law and has an independent judicial system. And a society that is democratic in nature, where power has changed between two different parties, where the president in office changes through democratic elections. That's what I saw. And what that, I think, is really revealing is that these basic principles of our democracy, of democratic institutions and elections, of freedoms and liberties and civil rights, of the rule of law and independent judicial systems, is not just for the democracies of North America and Western Europe, that these are universal principles that the people around the world can aspire to, and the Taiwanese have, and I think have shown tremendous gains over the last several decades. In fact, if you look at Taiwan's emergence as a full-fledged democracy over the last 2-3 decades, it's not only become a full-fledged democracy, it's also skyrocketed in per capita GDP and prosperity. Its per capita GDP now is higher than ours in Canada, which I think is a testament to these underlying principles.
In general, two Liberal MPs cut their Taiwan visit short on government advice to so-called to avoid confusion with Canada's foreign policy. And you did the opposite. What is at stake when Canada's government and its parliament send the world two different signals on Taiwan?
Yeah, I think that was an unfortunate incident. I think it signaled the wrong message, both to Taiwan and to Beijing. I think it signaled that the Canadian government was willing to acquiesce to Beijing's demands on Taiwan. And I don't think we should be doing that. I think what's really important in the Indo-Pacific region is to maintain peace and stability. And I think we maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait by making it clear to Beijing that there will be a price paid for any unilateral action taken by Beijing against Taipei. And so I think in that context, it's really important that we assure that high price. And that high price is assured through parliamentary visits from democracies' elected representatives to their counterparts in Taiwan. It's assured through freedom of navigation operations that are conducted by various democracies' navies through the Taiwan Strait. It's assured by, a myriad of other daily and monthly and yearly activities that take place between the democracies of the West and Taiwan. And so I think it's incredibly important to maintain that pace and tempo of those relations in order to assure that high price, and to make it clear to Beijing that there will be a very high price to be paid if any unilateral action is taken against Taipei.
It sends a wrong signal that Canada is willing to give up its principle just for some agriculture purchase. And that's really dangerous.
Yeah, I think there's two lessons to be taken from recent conflicts. The most recent one is what happens when a major global shipping lane is closed. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed now for several months, and it has disrupted global energy markets. If the Strait of Taiwan were ever to be closed because of some unilateral action by Beijing, it would have a massive impact on trade and investment here in Canada and across North America and Europe. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen. The other conflict that has broken out in recent years that demonstrates why we have to maintain a very high price against any unilateral action by Beijing is Russia's war against Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Russia took unilateral action to invade Ukraine just over 4 years ago. And in the blink of an eye, tens of billions of dollars of investment and trade evaporated. Mm-hmm. And the disruption to global trade has been enormous. And the disruption continues to this day, over 4 years later, because of Russia's war in Ukraine. So China, the impact of disruption by the PRC against Taiwan would be many-fold greater because China is a much, much bigger part of the global economy compared to Russia. which is why we have to work with democracies like Japan, like the Philippines, like Taiwan, to ensure that we maintain peace and security in the region. And that begins by not acquiescing to Beijing's demands about changing the way we have done things for many decades in the region.
So the last question is also about China and Taiwan. And if you could put several specific actions on Prime Minister's desk tomorrow to strengthen Canada's relationship with Taiwan and also to deal with China, what would that be?
Well, the first thing I think the government should do is sign the Canada-Taiwan trade arrangement. That trade agreement or arrangement was negotiated over a year ago. The negotiations concluded over a year ago, some 15 months ago. It's ready for both parties to sign, and I think the government should get on with it and sign that agreement so we can broaden and deepen trade and investment between Canada and Taiwan. I think the other thing the government should do is try to increase trade with Taiwan by investing in trade missions and trade commissioner services to increase two-way trade and investment between Canada and Taiwan. We have a significant trade deficit with Taiwan, and I think we can do a better job of facilitating trade flows between Canada and Taiwan.
I want to add one more question for my friends in Falun Gong. They just experienced the bomb threat in Toronto. Also, National Arts Center canceled their show, which is going on for 18 years, 2 decades. What's your view on that? What Canada should do about it?
I don't know exactly who's behind these bomb threats, but it is consistent with the tactics that the PRC has used in transnational repression, in disrupting diaspora communities. So I think the government of Canada needs to treat seriously this threat of foreign interference, which the Prime Minister himself only 15 months ago said was the greatest threat to the security of Canada. I think the government needs to treat this threat more seriously. It needs to implement the Foreign Influence Transparency Registry, a system that Parliament adopted into law almost 2 years ago, but is yet to be fully stood up. The government needs to clearly communicate to their counterparts in Beijing that there are guardrails to the relationship. That yes, we will have trade and investment between Canada and the People's Republic of China, and we will have relations in other domains as well, but here are the guardrails. And one of the guardrails is that you cannot interfere using transnational repression, using clandestine, coercive, and corrupting tactics against our citizens here on Canadian soil. And I think the government needs to make that clearly known to their counterparts in Beijing and needs to call it out publicly when it happens here in Canada.
I remember I talked to you about the implementation of this law back before the general election, but now it seems that there's no progress.
Well, it seems the government is dragging its feet on the implementation of the registry. They have selected an individual to be the commissioner, which is a good sign, but the registry has yet to be fully implemented and put into effect. And so my hope is that that's going to happen in the next several weeks. I would be very disappointed if the government doesn't get this up and running this summer, because that will have been 2 years since the law came into effect. And in my view, that's more than enough time for the government to get this registry up and running. I think that's a critically important tool for the government to counter Beijing's foreign interference. And here's why. In the NSACOP report, which is the report of a committee of parliamentarians that was produced a couple of years ago, they highlighted how intelligence has identified the United Front Work Department as a major source of foreign interference. The United Front Work Department has a budget of some $2.5 billion US, which is a larger budget than the PRC's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They estimated in the NSACOP report that about a quarter of that budget is allocated for money that is to be spread amongst Chinese diaspora groups in Western democracies. So that would be roughly $650 almost 700 million US dollars, which would be almost $1 billion Canadian dollars. And I don't think it's a stretch to guess that about a tenth of that could be coming to Canada, which would mean about $100 million a year is being spent by the United Front Work Department here in Canada in influence operations, much of it of a corrupt nature. And so bringing that flow of money to light, making that transparent, shedding a light on it, I think will go a long way to countering some of Beijing's malevolent foreign interference operations here on Canadian soil.
When I target those United Front organizations in Toronto, in Canada, and they say I'm a traitor to China because I grew up in China, and they also play the race card.
You've pointed out something really important. The PRC likes to weaponize disinformation against members of the Chinese community that speak up. And they do so by laying out the accusations that you've just outlined of racism, of anti-Chinese racism, anti-Chinese, fomenting anti-Chinese sentiment, xenophobia. This is a well-known tactic of the PRC that they use against people who are raising legitimate questions about human rights, about civil liberties, about transnational repression. And so I think the broader public needs to know that, because it's a deliberate tactic that they use to try to suppress the voices of minorities abroad. And we have to be careful not to parrot that. You know, we have to be careful. Like, China is an ancient civilization, and it has contributed much to humanity over many, many millennia. And it's something that, you know, everyone can be very proud of. But at the same time, we have to differentiate between the Chinese people and its civilization and its culture, and the government of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party, which often have been a malevolent force here in Western democracies.
Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.